you probably have questions about non-cognitive factors influencing medical school admissions. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. As you can see there, most people are familiar with grades and MCATs as being important, but I'm here to tell you that they're not the only thing that people look at. And so we'll go over a little bit about that. And one of the ways that I like to talk about it is, first of all, y'all that are here, how many of you have actually physically looked at an AMCAS application? 4? Okay. How many of you are from Davis and came here directly because you knew how to get here? 2? Okay. And how many of the other people used a map, GPS, or something on the internet? Everybody else. So I'm assuming that those of you who did that actually know how to use a computer, okay? So here's a brief history of medical education in the Americas. Contrary to the last one on the bottom, the University of Pennsylvania claims they were the first medical school in the Americas. They were not. The first medical school in the Americas was in Mexico City, established in January 7 of 1579. The first medical school in South America was the University of San Marcos, which still exists, founded in 1634. So about 100 years later, you know, University of Pennsylvania got on board, okay? So just to let you know that medical schools have been existing in the Americas for quite a while. So here it is, the road maps. This is where they are. Okay, the AMCAS application, which I just talked about, you can also apply to osteopathic medical schools. They have a different application. And then the foreign medical schools have different applications. And I urge you to get a copy of these if you're interested in going to those medical schools, because the application is the roadmap. Now, just focusing on the AMCAS application and breaking it down into various parts, okay, the AMCAS application asks about demographics. It asks about your parents' educational level. It actually asks you if you have parents. Now, this might seem silly, but some people, believe it or not, only have one parent, okay? They put down, say, their mom, and that's it. And they might even talk about, oh yeah, my dad, blah, blah, blah. They don't list the person. Personally, I find that disconcerting, because I just wonder, why didn't they put that person down? If the person is unpleasant or a rat, just put his name down and say, is a rat, okay? But at least list who it is. You have a disadvantage statement. You have a primary childhood residence, family income, and funding of post-secondary education. Now, what does this help us with? Well, it helps us to get an understanding of where you came from, which is important in understanding what the rest of it means, okay? If you came from a really poor environment in the Appalachians or something like that, went to a one-room schoolhouse and didn't have a very good opportunity there, and then went to a big university and had problems in your first couple of years, well, it might be understandable because you didn't have a good background. So if you don't tell us what your background is, then it's hard for us to judge, you know, how to interpret the other pieces of the puzzle. So here's how disadvantages break down, because many of you will apply as a disadvantaged applicant. Okay, here's disadvantages: low-income parents. Of course, if you say you're disadvantaged because of low income, and then you don't put the income on the income statement, because it asks you family income, and you leave that as a 0, okay, how many think that's a good idea? Oh, none of you? Oh, good. Okay. Single-parent household, poor educational opportunities, had to work during school. These are all things that slow people up when they're going to undergraduate. Social disadvantages, having a broken home, but you can still list the parent that was the bad person or that you don't like or who disappeared. They still have a name, probably. Having to care for family members that are ill or that kind of stuff, or even that they're not ill, victim of mental, physical, or sexual abuse, significant mental or physical disability. I thought I saw somebody who was in a wheelchair somewhere. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so we take that into account in a positive sense. So people, you know, and I've seen this when I was sitting on a committee, a discussion about, okay, what can we do at this school to meet the needs of this particular student who has X impairment or disability. Also, another disadvantage is if English is your second or third or fourth or fifth language, okay? So we take that into account. Going back to the AMCAS application, we like to see the parents' educational level. You know, if both of your parents were farmers in Vietnam, it's different than if they both have college degrees from back east somewhere, okay? You don't have the same level of disadvantage. Previous applications, this is always one that is kind of confusing. It's like, well, what if I apply again? Well, it's not a big problem, but if you keep applying with the same exact application, that's a problem, okay? Because you're supposed to be learning from these various applications that you make. So you want to at least have it be different. I would not recommend using the same personal statement. I have seen that. I have seen somebody apply 1 year, and then the next year they just cut and paste and use the same personal statement or the same activities or whatever. It doesn't work. School administrative actions. Oh, some people get busted for alcohol in the dorm rooms and things like that. Other people have nastier kind of administrative actions because they got, you know, in trouble with the law or something. So criminal record, military record, they ask you about that, and you should answer it truthfully. Don't think we can't find out about these things. We all have access to the internet. We can look stuff up, okay? Now, on the positive side, you know, if you've had service in underserved areas, if you've done something in an underserved area, or if you've provided service to an underserved population. So you might be servicing an underserved population that's not in an underserved area. For example, San Francisco. San Francisco has tons of doctors, but there are certain populations within San Francisco that are underserved because doctors don't take care of those folks. The transcripts, we look at that to see, well, what schools did you go to? Yeah, it makes a difference if you went to a big, fancy, famous school compared to a community college or a state college. Yeah, there is some factor there. I can't really explain that except to say each individual person on an admissions committee looks at it in their own individual way. I have seen people that say, oh yeah, this person, oh, they went to Stanford and I went to Stanford. Oh, I think she's really good, you know, because they went to Stanford, okay? That's their viewpoint. Other people, most of them did not go to, most of the people on the admissions committee did not go to state colleges. Some of them did go to community colleges. Most of them went to big universities. So there's a little slight disadvantage there, so you want to point out what was good about the school that you went to. Grades in your science classes, of course, count more than grades in your non-science classes. And then for those of you who have a slow start, okay, let's say you don't do so well in your first year or two in college. Don't give up. Don't start crying, okay? You don't have to do that. If your grades are getting better and you actually show on your transcript that you're learning how to get through your classes, it's not as much of a disadvantage as you might think, okay? So that will be taken into consideration. And then obviously if you do a post-baccalaureate program, you know, you need to do well in those classes because that's it. That's your last chance to improve your grades. So the MCAS, of course, the total score is important. The science score in biology is important. Very low verbal scores will hurt your application. I think this is really hard. The verbal score is hard to interpret in students who have English as a second language, because of course the MCAT does not measure your verbal ability in, you know, Vietnamese or Punjabi or Spanish or any other language. It just measures English, okay? So you might point that out if that's a problem for you when you're getting interviewed. And then of course you can repeat the test to improve your scores. Okay, experiences. Everybody gets to fill out the little piece. For those of you who have actually seen an application, there's a part where you describe the experiences that you've had, right? Somebody here who actually has an application? Say yes. Yeah. You've seen that part? Good. Okay. So then you might ask yourself, what types of activities are they thinking about? Well, if you have a medically related clinical activity, that means let's say you're doing research on diabetes. and you're actually working with patients, that would be clinical research. Then you could do just regular research. You heard Oksana a few minutes ago. She has done research on rats. Okay, that would be medical research, but not clinical because it doesn't deal with people. Leadership-related activities. Okay, well, somebody who helps get a conference like this going, you could consider that a leadership activity. Tutoring, especially if it's science-related, counts for something. Then community activities, if you're active in your church or something, or some other, breast cancer awareness, AIDS awareness, those kinds of things. Social activities, where you're just like the president of the square dance club, I don't know. Family activities, you got a big family and you guys have reunions or something, I don't know, you could list that. So it's just the point being there that you have many activities that you've done, there are many things that you've done, and some of these things give us an idea of what's in your head and how you might interact in a social environment in medicine. Something that sometimes is neglected is to put the total time that you spend on the activity. Obviously, going to a 4-hour conference once in your life, that's not a big activity. On the other hand, if you've done research for 400 hours, clinical research, well, then that counts a lot more. So you want to give us an idea of how much total time you spent on that activity, and describe your involvement in the activity. Okay, so these are all pieces of that non-cognitive story, okay, that we're getting just by looking at your application. The personal statement is also very important on the MCAS because it's your chance to speak directly to the admissions committee. Everybody's going to read that little piece of prose that you write. And I do recommend prose. Poetry doesn't seem to work. Cartoons don't work. Write a story, please. If you get stuck, you could kind of use this as a template if you want. Describe your background, what was your undergraduate educational experience, explain your weaknesses and how you overcame them, what was your exposure to medicine. And this is one that I like to focus on, is provide a memorable image, something that we can see that really demonstrates how important medicine is to you, or what kind of a person you are. I'm going to give you an example of one that I probably read about 15 years ago. And in that example, there was a young lady who was applying to medical school. And her story was that she had graduated from college, and then she enrolled in the Peace Corps, and she went to Africa because she was going to do her work in Africa. And on her way to the site where she was going to do her Peace Corps work, she had to ride a motorcycle, and that motorcycle got in an accident, and she lost her leg. So they flew her back to the United States. She had rehab done, and then at that point, this is what I ask you, what do you think she did next after she had her rehab? Correct. She went back to Africa, and she did her Peace Corps obligation. Okay? So when her application came up in front of the committee, normally we would say, okay, Sally Smith, okay, this is blah, blah, blah. People would talk about it. On hers, nobody had any discussion. They just said, oh, you want to admit her? Yeah, okay, fine. But we were done. It took like less than 30 seconds, okay? Everybody just thought she was wonderful, and she got accepted immediately. I don't know if she came here, but the point of the story is the story, okay? She had a very nice story, and everybody really kept that in their mind. So we didn't really have to mention her name. We just knew her by that girl that went to Africa, okay? So if you can put something in there that the committee members can remember, of course, that's to your advantage, because when you read hundreds of these things, pretty soon they all blur together, right? Everybody wants to be a doctor. Everybody wants to help people, the usual stuff, okay? Everybody says that. So how do we know that you really want to help people? Well, in that case, we could tell she really wanted to help people. The personal statement, this was these comments that I put here was adapted from something for the Harvard Business School. But I think what they said for that application was pretty appropriate for medical school application, believe it or not. And explains there what you should do. It's like, you know, respect the limits, write about worthiness as a candidate. Don't repeat what was in the rest of the application, but it's okay to accentuate with the other stuff, like expound on something that's somewhere else in your application. Reveal a greater dimension. Write about what you've done in the past in terms of what it says about you and your values. Discuss a critical experience in medicine that you have experienced or witnessed. Okay, that's where the image comes. Be positive. I had a student once who was very negative in how he said things. He was always talking about how unworthy he was. And I had to kind of slap him around and say, don't do that. Okay, you can't be going around telling people in an admissions committee that the glass is half empty. They will not accept you that way. So once he learned how to say the glass was half full, he became a medical student in Illinois, where he is now. Okay. Discuss your passions. Discuss events or persons who have influenced you. Obviously medical. It doesn't have to be medical. It could be somebody, you know, it could be somebody who had a dream, okay, and you follow that dream in terms of medicine. What experiences have been a turning point in your life, and what did they mean to you? For most people, or a lot of the applicants put things like, oh, you know, my mom had cancer and we had to go to the hospital a lot, that kind of stuff. That's a very common theme. Have a mentor review your statement so you don't have a lot of spelling errors and silly things. I think I remember one applicant who had the word I in his personal statement. It was like over 30 times. It just didn't go over well, okay? I mean, you are going to say I did this or I did that, but not 30 times or 40 times. So reapplication, I already talked about that. Don't submit the same application. Update your MCAT if it's low. Get new letters. If the letters that you have are more than 2 years old, write the updated personal statement. Do some more medically related clinical activities. Do more medical related research. Avoid taking a year off. That's just not a good way to impress people about how you're really focused and want to be a doctor, right? Oh, I took a year off. It's like, okay. I mean, if you have to take a year off before you do it, how interested are you in it, right? I mean, people, you can give explanations for it. You can say, hey, justify it and all that, but really, if you had two people to choose from, the person who took the year off or the person that did more research during that year, who would you pick? Okay, think about it. Then the interviewers, they're not as reliable for determining who's going to do well, but you may have a student interview, a faculty interview, or a group interview. Sample questions are available online. I've collected over 200 or 300 questions just from going online and hunting them down. And so they're good for practicing. I mean, you all take MCAT practice exams or courses. You could do that with the interviewing too, okay? Just look them up and answer the questions. Then there's this new popular thing called multiple mini interview, which is done here at Davis. Don't ask me a lot of questions about that because I haven't been involved with that. I just know what's written down there. It's supposed to be more reliable. The domains explored are questions in ethics, professionalism, interpersonal relationships, ability to manage, communicate, collaborate, and perform tasks, which obviously those are things that are important in medicine. Okay, so they have these little stations, and you spend 8 minutes or less per station. You could also contact medical students who've been through it to give you an idea of what they experienced in that. So it's good to ask questions. Picking a mentor, if you have, it's a good idea to have more than one because you don't want to hang your hat on what one person says. I mean, I'm saying this stuff to you. You can believe it if you want. You can not believe it if you want. But just remember, I only have one perspective. That's mine. I can't give you 500 perspectives. I can only give you mine. I can only tell you my experience at one school. Okay? Try to get more than one mentor. Try to find a faculty who has experience in the medical school admissions process. Okay? Remember, your college counselor has not applied to medical school and is not a doctor. So they can only tell you what they've heard. Even medical students can only tell you what they did on that one application of their own. Okay, so get information from other people. Avoid negative mentors. People that start recommending that you go into a PhD program or you go into law or something else. Okay, if that's not what you want to do, then that's not going to be a good mentor for you. A positive mentor asks what are the weaknesses in your application, what can be done to strengthen those areas, and gives specific suggestions for improvement. Negative mentor pushes you to consider another career, tells you you cannot make it, does not consider their own limitations as a mentor. As I said, I only have a finite ability as a mentor for people, and I know that, so I tell people, hey, go get more information. I think this is important to understand, that nobody is perfect, okay? Those of you who want to have the perfect application, it's not going to happen. So there's no perfect undergraduate pre-medical student, no perfect medical student, no perfect medical resident, no perfect doctor, and no perfect professor. It's just hard to believe, but that's true, okay? Mistakes. Here's some famous people who talked about mistakes. Anyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything new. That's Albert Einstein. Most people know who he is. Freedom is not worth having if it does not include the freedom to make mistakes. That was Mahatma Gandhi, okay? And then somebody you may have heard of, Al Franken, he used to be on Saturday Night Live. He's now a senator. Go figure. Mistakes are a part of being human. Precious life lessons that can only be learned are the hard way. Unless it's a fatal mistake, that's kind of tough for us doctors, which at least others can learn from. Okay, you want to try to avoid those as a doctor. Okay. But the point being is people feel like polluted or tainted or something if they don't have a perfect application. And perfect usually means high grades and high MCATs. And I'm here to tell you that that is not the only thing that's looked at. And if you look at it that way, you're making a big mistake, just like the people who are not going to look at applicants who have those kind of mistakes, because they're going to miss some really good doctors. And then, again, since I know that you all know how to look stuff up on the internet, I put a couple of talks about failure from people who are big successes. These are TED Talks, if you know what those are. And some information on winners who talk about failure. So I don't know if you guys have do you have a handout with this stuff on it or no? Oh, okay. We'll see what we can do to get you that. So should I go slower so you could write that? Sorry. You know, at the end of my email address will be there. You could email me, and I can send you the links to this stuff if you want, or the whole talk. How's that? Okay. So let's push on here. Does anybody know what grit is? Grit? Well, in sandpaper, is that stuff on the sandpaper that scratches. Does anybody know what sandpaper is? Yes. Okay. So that's what grit is. But in terms of psychology, it's a positive, non-cognitive trait based upon an individual's passion for a particular long-term goal or end state, coupled with a powerful motivation to achieve their respective objective. In Spanish, that second part, the powerful motivation to achieve their respective objective, is called ganas. Ganas, if you ever saw that movie, Stand and Deliver. Okay? So that's what ganas is. Anyway, grit is really important. And if you look at this University of Pennsylvania website here that I put there, or the TED Talk on grit, you'll find out that these are people that nobody's going to stop them from being a doctor. Not their first-year chemistry teacher that gave them a D or an F, not the counselor that tells them that they can't make it. Nobody stops this person from getting there. I just reviewed an application from a student who ended up going to nursing school and was a very successful nurse. And then after 10 years of being a nurse, he said, well, you know what? I didn't really want to be a nurse. I want to be a doctor. So he applied. He had 2.95 grade point average, and he has an interview at this school, okay? But it's because of that word, grit. It's obvious this guy has been a success, and at least I thought that he deserved an interview. I don't know if he's going to get in here or not, but at least he had a chance, okay? So you can have a chance. He did very well in his nursing school, by the way. He got, you know, I forget, something above a 3.5 in his nursing school. So he obviously can handle this stuff. But he shows a lot of determination, okay, passion and motivation. So if you can convince us that you have a passion and motivation, but don't just say, oh, I'm very passionate about medicine. That doesn't do it. Have to see from what you've done, okay? Don't try and trick us. We've read thousands of applications. Here's the character traits of success. Creativity, okay? Curiosity, open-mindedness, love of learning, perspective, which is wisdom, bravery, valor, and persistence, okay? These are all character traits of success. People who have a lot of these traits, even though they have problems, they're going to succeed, okay? So to the extent that your activities and the things that you're doing can convince us that you have these traits, then we're likely to think you're more successful. Integrity, that's real key. There have been people that have actually written on their medical school admissions how clever they were to steal cable from the cable company, or how clever they were to tell somebody that that their wife was pregnant so they could get on the plane to fly out of Denver in a snowstorm, and they weren't married. They didn't have a wife, okay? So such items do not get looked upon kindly by admissions committee. And I can guarantee you that those two people did not get an interview at UC Davis. I don't know if somebody else was silly enough not to read the application, but we did read it, and they failed the integrity test, okay? So you don't want to fail the integrity test, either when you apply to medical school, or when you become a medical student, or when you're a doctor. That's not a good thing, okay? Go do something else. Sell used cars, become a lawyer, but don't be a doctor, okay? Vitality, you got to be enthusiastic, love, kindness, social intelligence, citizenship, work well as a member of a group, okay? You have to work with groups all the time in medicine, and fairness, okay? Much as people try, we're not always fair. There's a study from the Institute of Medicine that showed that even in internal medicine, people who thought they weren't discriminating actually were discriminating against certain ethnic groups. There was a study a few years ago at Harbor, I think it's Harbor General Hospital in Los Angeles. And they looked at people who had long bone fractures. Does everybody know what a long bone is? It's not a little tiny one, it's a long one, like an arm or a leg, okay? Long bone fractures. And it turned out that people that didn't speak English, for the most part, went home on Tylenol, plain Tylenol. And people who spoke English, most of them went home on narcotics, okay? So it's hard to believe that the non-English speaking people were just tougher and they didn't need any narcotic analgesia for a long bone fracture. Anybody here ever broken a long bone? Did it hurt? Yeah, okay? So that's the kind of fairness that you have to be aware of, you know, that you need to treat patients fairly, but even though you know that, it doesn't always happen. Leadership, forgiveness, mercy, humility, prudence, self-regulation. These are all really important factors. And again, to the extent that your application shows these things like leadership, humility, you don't be too humble like that guy that I told you about who was always answering, oh, the glass is half empty. No, you know, you can't be that humble. Yeah, but you can't be, you know, bragging too much either. So you just got to be explain it the way it is. Prudence, self-regulation, self-control. Oh my God. Appreciation of beauty, gratitude, hope, humor, spirituality. These are all things. Language skills. It's nice if you speak any of these languages, particularly in the Sacramento area, because we have patients that all speak these kind of languages, okay? Including these. Did I leave anybody out? Oh, good. All right. Leadership skills, organizations in which you've played a leadership role, elective offices that you've held, projects you've put together, sports leadership, church leadership, dorm leadership, fraternity/sorority leadership. Those are all leadership things that you can put on your application. Don't be afraid, even if it's not medical. If you get, if the school likes your application, then you'll get a supplemental application Now, a lot of students put a lot of time into their AMCAS application, and then they just like cut and paste into the supplemental. Hey, you know, take it seriously. The reason you get a supplemental is so you can add something else. That's what supplemental means. So read the question that they're asking or the prompt, read it carefully, and then answer what they're asking. Sometimes people read it and then they come off with some answer that doesn't have anything to do with what people have put there for the question. And most of the time they start talking about themselves or say something that they want to say instead of answering what the question is. Try to complete the secondary quickly, because if you don't complete your application all the way through to turning in your secondary, somebody who applied maybe a couple of months after you did but finished their secondary before you did will get their interview before you get your interview. Okay? Got that? And then have somebody review it, just like the AMCAS application. Have somebody look at it for you. Then after you get into medical school, here's the medical educators talking about what happens. They feel the most important markers for program directors to consider are the first year grades and USMLE Step 1 or Step 2 scores. Okay, that's like the MCAT. Our data suggests that regardless of performance during college or the basic science years, students who perform competently during the clinical years are likely to continue exhibiting competent performance during internship. It is important to note that demographic factors such as age, race, gender, marital status, and presence of children played no role in intern ratings received by the program directors in their study. So the whole point of this is to say, look at, no matter what problems you had in undergraduate or even like in the beginning of medical school, if you do well in the doctoring part of medical school, you're going to be a good doctor, okay? So that's the key, is being good with your patients, doing what you're supposed to do. And there's the contact information I said. Do you have any questions? Oh, yeah, that's good.
When you talked about the secondary applications and sending them in as quickly as possible, how quick is too quick?
There's no such thing as too quick with that.
Like, they wouldn't think that you rushed it and didn't put thought into it.
No, only if it looked like that when you read it. I mean, maybe you're really good and you can put your thoughts down immediately. You could probably do it in a couple of days and you're done. And that's going to get you faster to your interview than the person that takes them a month or two to do it. So, yeah. Go ahead.
How much does work in the medical field in a position weigh in your application over others?
Well, first of all, it's a direct indication that you're interested in medicine, A. B, and this is the part that pre-medical students sometimes don't get, is that when you do that, you get to talk to doctors, you get to talk to patients, you get to learn about it. So when you go to that medical school interview and they ask you these ethical questions, you have experience to draw upon. So that's really, I think, the more valuable piece of it, is what you learn when you're actually doing it. Not so much to write it down and say, I did it, but learning something that's going to be useful when you apply to medical school. Okay? Other questions? Go ahead.
During the interview process, would the panel review all or take all interviews and then review after that, or is it like a first come first served basis? Would they determine who they want as soon as they interview the person?
I think I understand your question. Usually what happens in most schools is there's a certain like threshold, and so as the committee meets, they'll accept people on an ongoing basis. So they'll meet on a Tuesday and they'll admit some people on Tuesday, or maybe not. And then they'll meet the next Tuesday and admit a few more and a few more until they fill up the class, and then they create an alternate list, and then that gets finalized when people, get done with their musical chairs.
So they won't interview everybody and then create a roster afterwards?
No, that would be impractical. No, I don't think any schools do it that way, although it's possible. And as I said, I cannot speak to other schools because I'm not at those other schools, but I haven't heard of any schools that do it that way. Any other questions? Did I leave anything out that you guys wanted to, find out? Does this count or does it matter in medicine, or no? Okay, we're done then.
for being here. I will be in the hallway if you have any more questions.